for joining us for IGI Global's 2018 webinar, Does Education Have the Concept of Diversity Incorrect? Pitfalls and Successes of Current Diversity Practices, featuring Dr. Debra Ferdinand-James of the University of West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago. While everyone's kind of settling in, I would like to take this time to tell you a little bit about IGI Global. Okay, so IGI Global has been a leading academic publisher for 30 years with an ever-expanding portfolio of 39,000 reference books, over 175 highly indexed journals, and a broad collection of InfoSci databases. IGI Global is committed to providing the highest quality publications, excellent service, and a steadfast pledge to the research community and underrepresented research. We currently publish in 11 different subject areas, including business and management, computer science and information technology, education, engineering, environmental and agricultural and physical sciences, government and law, library and information science, media and communications, medical, healthcare and life sciences, security and forensics, and social sciences and humanities. Today's webinar will be recorded, and all attendees will be sent a recording of the presentation after the webinar. Also, be sure to stay to the end of the presentation for a special giveaway for all attendees. Additionally, attendees will have an opportunity to participate in a live Q&A session with Dr. Debra Ferdinand-James at the end of the presentation. So you can actually use your GoToWebinar control panel and type in questions using the chat feature located at the bottom of the control panel, and feel free to type questions as we go along, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Now, I would like to go ahead and just jump right into it and introduce our speaker, Dr. Ferdinand-James. Dr. Debra Ferdinand-James is an educational technologist, lecturer level, and a blended learning champion at the University of West Indies. She received her doctorate in workforce education and development while working in distance education for 6 years in the areas of online course design and development, faculty online training and support, and online help desk inquiries. Her research interests include curriculum inclusiveness, blended learning, academic support, mixed methods, and international collaboration with researchers and professors at the University of Naples, Italy, as a member of their Industry 4.0 task force for developing joint publications on Industry 4.0. She presents and publishes widely in these areas at local, regional, and international conferences and in peer-reviewed journals. So I would like to personally thank Dr. Ferdinand-James for joining us this evening, and I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to her.
I am from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. If you look on my screen, my twin island republic is just off the coast of Venezuela. And so we're very far south. As a matter of fact, we're the last 2 islands in the Caribbean chain of islands. And that beautiful music you were hearing while we started is the music of the steel pan, which is our national instrument. And we are also known worldwide for having the best national carnival, as you can see there. So we pride ourselves in being racially diverse. We have a high tolerance for diversity in my twin island republic. And so when I came out just about a couple of years ago to study in the US, I realized I had a different view of diversity. I came to the US and studied my associates, bachelor's, master's, and my PhD over a period of 10 years in 3 different institutions and in 3 different US states. And that really, coming out of that experience, led to my dissertation research on curriculum inclusiveness. And so I would like to broach the topic of diversity in education by looking first at the growing diversity in US higher education, and then examining briefly the policy that governs that growing diversity. We'll want to examine certainly the change in cultural metaphor that informs the growing diversity, look at theoretical lenses to understand diversity, and then using that understanding to respond to diversity. So it is here, it is a reality, the browning of the US population or society, because the 2015 statistics show that diversity and not the dominant white or Caucasian majority is now the new majority. And you have the Latinos being the fastest growing minority group amongst the other minority groups. And so it is a reality that the higher education institutions in the US are having to come to grips with. It is here, it's here to stay. It's going to be that we come in the next decade and the decades to follow. So just for example, if we take a look at this graphic that gives us some demographics, this pie chart from the University of California, Santa Barbara. This is the 2017 ethnic diversity of undergraduate students. You can see the accumulative percentages for the minority groups actually exceed that of the white or Caucasian group. So it's very much here, and we have to accommodate and shift our thinking and think about how we are going to shift to this new reality of diversity being the new majority. Usually, diversity is understood in terms of the diversity index that is produced by the US News and World Report for national universities in the US for undergraduate students. Of course, that's the largest student body on the campus. And so they collect data from each, that is the US News and World Report. They collect data annually, student data, on 7 ethnic groupings: African American, Hispanic American, Indian, Asian, Pacific Islander, white or non-Hispanic, and multiracial. And they use a method or formula to calculate the diversity index, which ranges from 0 to 1. So the closer you are to 1, it means that your campus diversity is higher. So the top 5, if you look at my screen here, and this is from that source, Andrews University in Miami, for the academic year 2016-2017, actually shows a very high, well, close to 8, which means it's very diverse. And as you go down, you can see the top 5, they are all 0.7. So very high diversity or diverse student population. The undergraduate students are very much interested in these kinds of diversity indices because they want to experience education with other ethnic groups different to themselves. And universities are now having to really view or improve their diversity indices in order to capture that growing new diversity majority amongst the student population, that undergraduate market. So I have a question for you. How do you think, and you can type in your chat and Carolyn will moderate, how do you think predominantly white or black universities or colleges would rank on such a diversity index? Something for you to think about. Do you think it would be low or high? How are we doing with responses, Caroline?
Okay, so we currently have that that there will be a lower score. It looks like unanimously, a lot of individuals believe that it will be lower.
Definitely. So the lower you are to 1, it means that if you go to that college, you are more likely to just encounter another student of your ethnic group. Whereas the higher you go in the index, it means that you're more likely to encounter others from a different ethnic group. And so you'd have a richer experience. And actually that experience would prepare you better for the real world, because you're going to meet this new majority in the workplace and in real life in society. So universities really now have to look at their branding and rethink how they're going to compete for this new majority that's coming in to the student campus. Ironically, international students, who total approximately 1 million students for the academic year 2016-2017, they are not included in the diversity index. And this is the norm. International students are not included because the colleges do not capture their geographic origin or ethnicity separately. They just say that the students are not from the US and they are not included. But they contribute $36.9 billion to the US economy for that academic year. In fact, over 450,000 jobs were created as a result of international students on US campuses. And the US is known to lead in hosting the largest number of international students, which means international students is really a good source of revenue for US campuses and also the economy. And you have that not only financial, but also the cultural, cross-cultural currency that they bring. And I think it's time that the US not have them invisible on the diversity index, because in truth and in fact, they do add to the growing diversity on US campuses, very much so from an international perspective. So the current practice of not including them in the diversity index, it doesn't show the true reflection of ethnic diversity on US campuses. So I want to ask you, what do you think would be the implications if they should include the international students on the diversity index? And I just want to add, that should not be too difficult with the advancement in technology today. They can leave a space there for them to put it in, or they can use past research on international students who have been here and come up with some categories, and then you write an algorithm to pull out that big data to really get the information. So how do you think that would impact if they should include the international students in the diversity index?
Okay, it looks like we have a few coming in that they need to give more of an accurate diverse count. Many schools need it. Higher diversity would be there, students would be served better, and they'll be more likely to form communities. So overall, we're seeing, I think we should, because our economy is becoming more global, so reflecting it societally in our education system.
Definitely. So it's really a positive. They have nothing to lose, really. I think it's just a matter of will. And we need to really highlight that this is a gap there in the whole diversity narrative that they need to address, as we move forward. But we know diversity is not just about geographic origin and ethnicity. Students bring a lot more now in the 21st century tertiary classroom. So you have cultures and subcultures in this complex growing diversity. So the traditional traits like disability, age, religion, language, class are now expanded to include gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, immigration status, digital status, of course, because you can identify your digital natives. They walk around wired on campus. Their eyes are always glued to a screen, or they're listening to something on iPod. And so you can tell that this is, a digital native. And so these groupings now help to identify the minority groups and the growing diversity amongst the student population. Of course, if you know you have those kinds of students on campus, you better have a good Wi-Fi network on your campus, because they are connected, they're online. Just to draw an example. But millennials, those who were born after 1980, they see diversity a little different than, let's say, the baby boomers, who preferred diversity in terms of representation and assimilation, meaning we are represented in the numbers. So, for example, you might see in a magazine a sort of pan shot, and you'd have represented there different ethnic groups. But that representation just stops there. It does not mean that they are connecting with each other like the millennials, sorry. They view diversity and inclusion as connectiveness, because they are all wired and they're very much in tune with issues that are highlighted in the media. And so, for example, things like the Black Lives Matter movement, that issue, the LGBTQ community issues, and very much in the mainstream media now, the refugee exodus, which all make diversity a dominant narrative today. I know we have that experience here, being just next door to Venezuela. And so we have to change and shift our view of what diversity looks like. It's not just the visitors, the international visitors coming in during Carnival anymore. It's more than that. And so campuses have to reflect this complexity in their diversity policies. So, for example, the University of Georgetown has in their statement, the university does not discriminate on the basis of, and you have the traditional ones, and then you have things like gender identity or expression, genetic information, national origin, personal appearance. You have sexual orientation, source of income, things like even veteran status. So it's very broad. And if the universities are to really attract this new growing diversity majority of students, they need to reflect that in their policy statement. So students know that they have diversity as a core value, and this is what the experience will bring. And they can be assured of this non-discrimination and this openness to diversity. So this growing diversity is now shifting the cultural metaphor, which is definitely a plus. So before, when we had that metaphor of the melting pot, which meant that teachers would help students to assimilate to the dominant US culture, which was really about the white or Caucasian majority. And so we all had to learn the customs and all those iconic cultural symbols like the blue jeans, whichever brand you want, we all sort of assimilated. I remember very much when I was there, and you wore your jeans because, this is all part of the dress in the culture and identifying with the melting pot. And you ate the foods and so on. And it was accepted. I mean, over the last 4 decades, that's more or less what the metaphor was. But it's changing. It's changing to the salad bowl, because we now have, true diversity being reflected in the society and the population, as you see. So, in contrast with the salad bowl, you now have mixtures of various ingredients that keep individual differences, which will really make the true representation of the cultural tapestry, the rich cultural tapestry of the US society, and by extension, the campus population. We're now in that transition or thinking that being in that salad bowl, we now have to acknowledge each other's differences, not melt into them, because this is what makes us rich, the diversity. So I'd like to look now at some of the theories that help us to understand diversity. We know it's not an easy topic to discuss, but I think if we approach or enter the conversation recognizing it's no longer a melting pot, but a salad bowl, we all have our individual differences, and that is what we need to recognize. Thankfully, after 9/11, the UNESCO, they did not waste any time in coming up with a national, universal declaration on cultural diversity. Because, I mean, that was such a tragedy. You don't want to have that repeated in the future. And so teacher educators now had to shift their teaching in multicultural education when we prepare teachers, shift from that assimilation to multiculturalism, which means then that you recognize the value of cultural diversity and what it brings, all the benefits, and what it takes also in understanding the other who is different but not less than. And that was one actually of the main points of the Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity, to use education to promote that awareness of cultural diversity. And thankfully, with that shift, we will avoid pitfalls like ethnocentrism, where in the past, when we were the melting pot, you had that white supremacy very much evident in educational curricula, in also the higher education institutions. And it was not really responsive to culturally and internationally diverse students. In fact, it made them invisible in the classroom, which, in terms of responsive climate for learning, would make them feel alienated. I know, in particular from my own experience, I felt very invisible at times in the classroom, because I was not only international, but I came from developing country context. So what was in the books and what was presented was very much a developed country sort of representation. And I would sit there and try, on my own, to see how I can, adapt and modify my thinking to fit this developed country status. Eventually, I started to read to try to understand, because a lot of the journal articles would not, it would not give you a lot of depth. They would just deal with where the U.S. education system was at the time. And of course, I did not have my secondary education there. So I became, I had to learn how to speed read. And eventually I decided, it's too much for me to try and go do the back and forth, to modify what the developed country context is giving or saying to me to the developing context. I just didn't have the time to do that kind of conversion. And so, I just had, for the sake of time and for success and everything else, I just had to go with the host country curriculum. And, you felt a bit cheated because your education is so expensive. I mean, your tuition could run like 2 to 3 times the cost of a U.S. student. So you are paying for yourself indirectly and 2 other U.S. students. But, these are some of the issues that you would have to take into consideration now and it's good that they're making that shift to multicultural education. You would also avoid things like the cultural insensitivity, because the multicultural ME education would help you to understand different cultures. So things like referring to Asians as Orientals, which is really used for objects and not people, or referring to international students as speaking a foreign language. Of course, it's their first language, but when you say things like that, it just shows that you're not culturally sensitive. So it's good that that shift is happening in the cultural metaphor. You can now discuss the issue of the growing diversity in a more neutral way without having to, get too involved in any one group, but to look at it, collectively at first. Critical race theory is one theory that has been used in the literature extensively when it comes to diversity, and this focused more in the 1970s and had a binary focus with more the black and white race issues. But over the last 2 or 3 decades, the narrative has extended to other racialized groups for unmasking that endemic racism in education and how we can eliminate that. So, for example, when we talk about tribal crit or tribal critical race theory, we we are talking about the experiences of Native Americans, their liminal positioning in the whole conversation of diversity and how they're represented in curricula, and their experiences in educational institutions. And once we understand why that is happening, all of that, because it's a form of racism, we can now correct that. And what tribal crit enables us to do is to give the narrative through the lens of the native scholars, Native American scholars. So they do the counter storytelling and give the position through the lens of the native, and rightly so, position them. They were here first. They're not they're not coming from anywhere or so. So that kind of positioning really should give them some priority, and not the liminal positioning that traditionally would happen prior to the the shift from assimilation to multiculturalism and understanding the diversity. And similarly, the Latino crit or Lat crit reveals the challenges Latino experiences, their ethnic experiences in education. Of course, again, they have been portrayed in a negative way at times. Sometimes because of their language, they are perceived as not, being intelligent. Because they don't speak English as a first language, teachers may refer to them or relate to them as, not being able to express themselves properly, and so on and so on. And as a result of that, you may find that because there's this perception about language and speech and spelling and so on, they are not able to make the kinds of grades they would need, probably to qualify for scholarships to go on in their education and so on. If the system really is equitable, those kinds of support systems would be put in place immediately, and teachers would be able to work with students to overcome any kinds of language barriers, and understand the way that they learn. They are very communal, as opposed to the American students who tend to be individualistic. And so all those kinds of inequities we can now unmask and change with the Lat crit. And similarly with the Asian crit, you have the typical stereotyping and all the other disenfranchisements that come with Asian minorities in U.S. schooling, because they are perceived as being, the brightest students, and that's a pressure in itself. They are perceived as being the mathematicians and statisticians and so on. And in truth and fact, that is not actually so. I can share with you a recent experience. As recent as last month, I had to internally examine a thesis, a PhD thesis for a student in the Caribbean, and the external examiner was Asian. She's from the US. And when we ended up with our assessments, our reports, we differed on what the outcome of the thesis was. And so in reconciling, I was surprised. I have to say I was surprised when she said, I will defer to Dr. Ferdinand's assessment because I am a qualitative researcher. And of course, being mixed methods, I highlighted the quantitative part of the assessment, the statistical tests that were used for analyzing the data in the thesis were not consistent with the norm, with what is expected. And so I had to do a lot of commenting on that. And I was surprised. And I have to say, it was a wake-up call for me, because if anything, in my traditional way of thinking, I would have thought, being Asian, that she would have, gone the quantitative way, just sharing. So I would like to ask you at this point, what has been your experience with diversity, and how do you see, if it is that you had that thinking of assimilation, how do you see yourself shifting now to this new diversity majority? If you can share just a few of those experiences, so I know that you're connecting with me. What have been your experiences with diversity, and how have they been changing now that we have this new diversity majority in the society and by extension on campuses?
Okay, we have a couple answers. One person says that they've traveled extensively and always tried to be a good guest and learn from the culture while there. Another person said a few colleges started hiring diversity/minority leaders as a part of their leadership team, so we're seeing that currently trend. And it is now kind of morphing into the salad bowl world that you referenced earlier in your presentation.
Okay, so at least we know that it is a reality, and the changes are being made to deal with it. One part of the critical race theory tenet is being looked at now currently because of the mainstream media highlight of, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, the LGBTQ communities, their issues, that those things are being highlighted. And so intersectionality speaks to these experiences that these minority groups suffer, the oppression and the discrimination they experience due to multiple social identities or overlapping social identities. So it's not just about race, and it's not just about class. It's like a combination of race, class, sexual orientation, and any other of the other traits. And so they can't be examined through a singular lens, like, let's say, critical race theory, where you have that whole, it's about power, but it's not binary. It's not just about black and white supremacy, white privileges, and so on. And so we now have to look at these issues as they intersect through multiple lenses. So, for example, I can tell you, I remember sitting in a class, and my lecturer, he wanted to refer to what international students bring to the U.S. and he felt, that he was being kind, apart from all the cross-cultural experiences that we bring. He said to the entire class, if it were not for the international students, this university would not be clean. And this is just an example. So I'm international, and okay, so because of my skin color, I may not be chosen for, let's say, jobs up front where the predominantly white majority would be placed to interact with the white majority student population. So I am international, I am a person of color, and so I am now experiencing a kind of classism in the sense that, well, I would be given, because I'm not from the United States, I would be given a work study or a work assistantship or whatever to clean. And then I would be placed, if I'm because of my sexual orientation, I would be placed in the basement because I'll be out of sight from everybody. So I'm cleaning. I'm down there because of my sexual orientation, and because I'm not from the US, I am relegated to that kind of status. So that's just an example. And that kind of intersectionality needs to be highlighted, because if it isn't, you would still have the ignorance. So that if that lecturer understood what was happening there, it's clearly a form of discrimination. It cannot be that all international students are given cleaning jobs for the university. And I'll leave that there. So when we look at the intersectionality through the CRIT lens, the CRT lens, it will help educators to unveil these interlocking inequities in educational curricula and experiences and bring balance, correct the situation by being fair and equitable in the way they deliver the curriculum, not just the content, but also all the co-curricular activities. So how do we respond to diversity? And we have to, because change is upon us. And as Barack Obama says, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. So we are the change that we seek. At the university I studied, I know that they were just about to launch their diversity initiative, and they made diversity a core value in the curriculum. And as a result, they hosted faculty diversity training workshops. But what they did not do was make it mandatory, so that the faculty who really needed to go to those workshops, my research showed that they were not attending. It's actually the other diverse faculty were attending. So I think one way we can help in transitioning and accommodating for this new diversity majority on the student campus is to mandate that faculty diversity training mandated for faculty. And we have to monitor these all these initiatives. So for example, the course evaluations will now have to be revised to reflect things like classroom climate and inclusiveness. To what extent students feel safe and cared for, the cultural competencies of the instructor. So you're looking more at qualitative sorts of aspects and not just, grades and whether learning outcomes were achieved and whether the content was clear and so on. Without capturing that kind of information, the improvements that are needed to better serve those underserved and underrepresented groups, or those who at risk of experiencing that oppression and discrimination. If you don't capture that, these improvements would not be made for these groups that probably need it the most, and so it would go unnoticed. So they really need, in looking at revisiting diversity policy, to have the supportive kinds of mechanisms to monitor and measure diversity. Certainly, diversity training is needed to change those old mindsets, and definitely to be aware that we're now, the metaphor has changed, and what we want is unity and diversity and not separatism. Separatism would be more like representation, where yes, we're in the salad bowl, but we all have our, we have our black colleges and white colleges, and we have, separate groups that we all go our separate ways, and so that is that kind of ideology has to change and emerge into more towards unity and diversity, and all towards the aim of reflecting on how faculty can create a safe and inclusive campus climate and classroom because of the diverse groups you have, and what kinds of challenges and issues that they would face and how to treat with that so that students will feel safe and inclusive in the classroom. And definitely they would need to understand intersectionality, where individuals experience oppression and discrimination due to overlapping social identities. And certainly they would need to do a lot of group work to enable students from different backgrounds to work together in a community to understand, their backgrounds. My experiences, I would remember clearly when we would be asked to do group work. The professor would say, okay, you all put yourselves into groups of 4 and choose your topics and so on. And this was, just after 9/11. And the Muslim students with their hijabs would just be left standing in the classroom. And the professor would always have to, put them into the into the groups. Those kinds of feelings of discrimination and isolation, all of that, faculty need to know. If you're going to put students in groups, you have to do a little more than just saying put yourself in groups, but prepare students to mix and accept the differences amongst each other. And certainly, someone mentioned before, you want to diversify faculty because faculties from different countries, they bring their different cultures. They would be able to relate to the diversity backgrounds of the students. They will be also sensitive to the multiple social identities that students bring. It's not just race, it's language, it's national origin, its sexual orientation, because they would have experienced some of that coming from a different culture into another. And definitely exposing US students and faculty to diverse persons from different cultures and regions will help to build those bridges of understanding about difference in fellow students. Those who are not from the US, they really need to have that openness and understanding, because remember the metaphor before was you melt into one US culture, and so now it's now different. We are now the salad bowl, and it's not one culture, but understanding and accepting our differences. Certainly that would help to advance the diversity initiatives that are currently ongoing, and would be in the future as universities grapple and try to accommodate for this new growing diversity majority on campus. And definitely you want to diversify the curriculum. The American Council on Education is currently doing a lot of work, and they have internationalized at least 4 disciplines: psychology, chemistry, history, and political science. And this is really a plus, because those international perspectives in the curriculum will help US students and faculty to have a different view on these course topics and the subject develop, critical thinking and problem-solving skills. It will help to develop their creativity because they now have to try and understand a different perspective from that of the U.S. And that would certainly avoid pitfalls like the host country curriculum, where you have students experiencing that kind of cultural and intellectual bondage, which is not really motivating in terms of learning. And once you accommodate for that kind of international perspective, it certainly would benefit the international students. Because when they return home, most of them would be on scholarships. They would be able to transfer easily what they have learned. In my experience, coming from the Caribbean and coming from a developing country context, what I found very much was happening is, once you were given the developed context, no one seemed to recognize that that could not fit easily into a developing country context. And so, you were needed to be told what was the core components and what could you leave out. Not that they should actually teach two different curricula, but at least acknowledge that it would not just easily transfer into a developed country context, particularly when you come from a small developing country and not, the bigger countries like those in Africa or even India. Yeah. And so technology is here with us, and we're using a lot of technology enhanced assessments. It's part of the ongoing advancement in higher ed. The thing with making the transition, sometimes we just go online and we download whatever is there without actually modifying the rubric. And so sometimes you have a bit of cultural insensitivity taking place. And I'll just, this article I published in Faculty Focus, I will just give you an example. This is probably typical from something that was downloaded online. And it says, it's understood student is being referred to. So this is for a discussion rubric to mark or to at least assess the contribution. And it says, does not make effort to participate in learning community as it develops, seems indifferent. And it's understood that the student does not make the effort. It's very direct, and we're putting a lot of focus on the student here. But to really make it more culturally sensitive, you can put the focus on the contribution and not the student. So you can say contributions to the online learning community as it develops, not evident, and it suggests indifference. But you don't want to say, that they're not making an effort because you don't know for sure why that is not happening. It could be a language barrier because most international students do not speak English as a first language. So they may have some challenges with, responding quickly and so on. And for example, in the last category, delivery of posts utilizes poor spelling and grammar in most posts. Posts appear hasty. So you want to soften that and make it a little more culturally sensitive by saying something like rules of grammar and spelling overlooked in most posts, evidence of hurried expressions in posts. It puts the focus on the contribution of the post itself rather than the student. And having an awareness for this cultural sensitivity would help to sometimes meet the cultural expectations of the international students, because we are different, and I have to say we now, because I was an international student, we have a different way in our communication pattern. And if you use very direct, somewhat condescending language, it could come over as being culturally insensitive. So you want to modify what you download and really pay attention to student diversity and their backgrounds. So in conclusion, I leave you with some thoughts. Creating a welcoming, safe, and inclusive campus climate for the growing diversity on U.S. campuses can only redound to the benefits of the students, who then become the promoters of their experiences to other students at home and abroad for potentially enhancing the student enrollment of their former U.S. institutions. I thank you for listening, and I now open the floor for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ferdinand-James. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and take any questions that you have. I did see a few come through as we were going through the presentation. If you could please type them using the chat feature in your GoToWebinar toolbar. As we do have a limited time, for those questions we're unable to answer, my contact information and Dr. Ferdinand-James' contact information will be at the end of the presentation for additional questions. So we're going to go ahead and start. One question that came in while you were doing your presentation is, could you please deepen the concept of digital status? Everyone knows the difference between digital natives and digital immigrants, but I'm not really sure about related differences in digital competencies.
Okay, so the digital, and I'll just go back in the digital natives, they communicate differently. And so digital natives are born into the technology. It comes natural for them using smartphone, communicating, using social media. That's their second language. But persons who are digital immigrants, they were not born into the technology, and so they have to learn how to catch up to the digital natives, how to chat online, how to text, tweet, and so on. So there's a gap there that immigrants and natives have, and there should be an acknowledgement of the differences in those students in the classroom, so that you are not only going to require students to tweet and have online forums or synchronous forums that they may need to use their tablets and mobile phones. You have to mix the way you present the curriculum to accommodate for those differences.
Okay, thank you very much. Another one is, could you please go into more depth about critical race theory, e.g., what are the assumptions, goals, and methods?
Okay. So the critical race theory helps us to understand the representations that place the minority groups in liminal positions, in racist positions, so that their cultures may be underrepresented or misrepresented in the curriculum. For example, when you are reading in journals, I had that experience, the way the researchers would write about African Americans. I kept reading over and over the poor Black students and the poor Black students. And I was very confused, me being a biracial or Black student, and on a scholarship, I'm like, I know that, not all Black students are poor, or, they are underperforming, and you have this achievement gap. And so that kind of representation is what the critical race theory would unmask. And what you have is a method of counter storytelling in one of its tenets that you would then apply and present the story in a balanced way, so that you would not have that unfair representation of the minority group. And so you have counter storytelling that would explain that whiteness was used as a standard of normalcy, but in truth and in fact, that is a racist kind of representation. And what you need to do is to tell the story through the eyes of, let's say, the Black scholars who would give you a balanced view and not a skewed view of that minority group.
Okay.
I will, yeah.
Oops, I apologize. And due to time constraints, we're just going to take one more question for this webinar. As I said earlier, Dr. Ferdinand-James's contact information will be at the end of the presentation for continuing the discussion. So the last question will be, how would you define specific differences between Lat Crit and Asian Crit perspectives of critical race theory, since both Latinos and Asians are of foreign origin in the U.S.?
The Latinos are those who come from the Latin American countries, like from Brazil and Puerto Rico. And so their focus is more on establishing those identities that are unique to them in their culture. Asians focus more on they because they come from a different geographic region. They are stereotyped in such a way that they are seen as those who are high achievers, and they are, because again they have a higher color than the Latinos. They have a certain amount of privilege, but at the same time that privilege could be misrepresented, because not all, as I pointed out before, not all are mathematicians and statisticians and high achievers. And so they tend to stereotype them in that way. So you have that kind of difference. One group, is portrayed in a sort of minimal way in terms of achievement, and then you have the opposite on the other side. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you very much. And I know there was a few questions about as far as getting the slides for this presentation. A full recording of the presentation and the PowerPoint slides will be made available to everyone. Additionally, for those who are interested in more information around this topic, please view the recommended publications. Our presenters' research, along with thousands of other resources, are available on the IGI Global online bookstore. And those who order directly through IGI Global will receive a 20% discount. I would also like to go ahead and draw your attention to Dr. Ferdinand-James's contribution to IGI Global. She published a chapter in Privacy and Security Policies and Big Data. And as a thank you for attending the webinar, we would like to extend a 40% discount on this publication and the recommended publications for all those who attended. So there'll be a follow-up email on how to access your 40% discount, so be sure to check your inboxes. Additionally, all of IGI Global's publications and research are available as a part of IGI Global's InfoSci database collection, which includes InfoSci Books, a collection of 3,900 books containing 86,000 chapters, InfoSci Journals, a collection of 175 journals with over 22,000 articles with 1 million citation references. Also, currently, something that might be interesting is, along with our databases, we recently unveiled new pricing. And as a part of this new pricing, IGI Global is offering InfoSci Journals, which is a collection of 175 journals, for an annual subscription price for as low as $4,950 for new customers. Specifically, we actually started a new open access initiative for any library that invests in an IGI Global Journal database. IGI Global will match the library's investment with a fund of equal value to go towards subsidizing the open access article processing charge for their students, faculty, and staff at their institution when the work is submitted and accepted under open access into an IGI Global Journal housed within that collection. So this new initiative pretty much allows researchers not only to affordably access the quality content that they need, but also provides an affordable way for them to publish under a quality open access model. So please visit the webpage for details and recommend this database to your library to take advantage of this offer. Once again, I would like to thank everyone for their time, and those who are interested in learning more about IGI Global, please visit our website at www.igi-global.com, and be sure to visit our Publish With page to learn about the publishing opportunities we offer. We're currently seeking proposals specifically in diversity and education, but then also in our 11 other subject areas. Once again, our presentation has been recorded and will be sent along. And then as a thank you, we will be offering a 40% discount on Dr. Ferdinand-James's contributed publication and recommended publications that were listed. So be sure to check your inbox for a special discount code. I hope that you will join us for upcoming webinars. And for any questions or for more information about our webinar series, please feel free to contact me at communications@igiglobal.com. Also, if you want to continue the conversation with Dr. Debra Ferdinand-James, you are more than welcome to email her, and her contact information is on the screen for you as well. So thank you once again for joining us, and to you, Dr. Ferdinand-James, for presenting a very informative presentation. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you, and same to you.